Everybody, and welcome back to the Morning Bulletin here on the Blood Red channel. I'm your host, Edward Kay, and I'm joined today by Liverpool.com's very own Dave Comerford. And today we are once again going to find ourselves discussing Liverpool's midfield issues and how their recruitment in the January transfer window and in the summer following might be looking to address those issues. We're going to start first without the obvious Bellingham chat. We'll come on to that later. But we're going to start, Dave, with Liverpool being linked with 21-year-old defensive midfielder from Flamengo, Joao Gomes. Obviously, I've not seen too much of him, Dave, but you seem a bit more clued up. What can you tell us about this one?
I mean, the first thing that stands out really is that he's not someone who's kind of established, and by that I mean he's not playing in one of the top 5-6 European leagues. He's only 21. You know, coming from South America, I suppose would make the move more of a gamble, really. In terms of his sort of role, his attributes, I would have thought he'd be coming in as a sort of Fabinho backup / successor, and I think that's an area that has to be addressed by Liverpool at some point. So yeah, I've been obviously doing a little bit of research about him. There's a talent scout on Twitter called Jacek Kulig, and he kind of runs through some of the sort of qualities he has as a footballer. So he says he's a box-to-box midfielder, so maybe a bit of a different mold to Fabinho in that sense. Tireless runner, fast and agile, good ball carrier, great positional awareness, tenacious tackler, very high work rate, and a winning mentality. And also, it's interesting that in a separate tweet, he compares him to Gennaro Gattuso. So if you want maybe a player that he's in kind of the same mold as, he could be the one. I think the other thing that stands out kind of beyond the profile of the player is the recruitment strategy, like I kind of touched on earlier. And for me, it would be some hallmarks of potentially what we're seeing from Arsenal. Obviously, they've signed Martinelli a couple of years ago, and then Marquinhos in the previous summer. So maybe it is about kind of exploring that market, exploring those young talents, which maybe isn't something Liverpool have done a huge amount in very recent history. So I think that'll be interesting too. Obviously, you've just got to make sure you can navigate any issues that pop up with work permits and things like that. But obviously, you'd have confidence in the club to overcome those if they really want the player. And yeah, looks like it might be one to watch for sort of January and next summer, maybe.
Yeah, certainly would be helpful to sort of strengthen those midfield options. But what kind of role do you think he could play in Jurgen Klopp's midfield? We've spoken a lot recently on the podcast and here on the Blood Red channel about, you know, whether there's issues with balancing that midfield, with Harvey Elliott on the right-hand side. Does he do enough defensively? But bringing in someone like Gomez, who obviously can offer a bit more going backwards as well as still contributing going forwards, do you think that would sort of help Liverpool's balance going forward?
Yeah, I think, you know, based on what I've read there, it's if he is a Fabinho sort of backup option, then he is someone who's different in profile. I think that's an interesting question for Liverpool when it comes to finding this backup that they do need. Do they bring in someone who can basically just offer exactly what Fabinho does, so Fabinho can't play stylistically, things don't change that much. Similar maybe to what you have with Robertson and Tsimikas, where they're very, very similar in terms of the sort of style of football that they play and their approach. And it means Liverpool don't really have to adjust too much. Or did they bring in, because, you know, Fabinho is one type of defensive midfielder, but there's kind of a few different sort of interpretations of that role, if you like. Do they bring in someone who can offer a different skill set? Is that actually the better way to manage it squad-wise? So, you know, he looks like someone who could potentially play, you know, alongside his compatriots as well within that midfield. So I think you make an interesting point there, and maybe someone who could sort of slot into that more defensive-minded position alongside Fabinho, where we saw Thiago play the other night, for example. And yeah, definitely there is a need for a player who has that sort of defensive awareness, really, because I don't think it's nothing to do with, you know, when certain other midfielders play and we look exposed. It's nothing to do with a lack of application. It's just I don't think they have that sort of nous in terms of they're willing to get back, but they don't really know the ideal place to position themselves to kind of break up opposition attacks. And maybe aren't specialists when it comes to reading the game. And and making those challenges. So yeah, you got to think about the dynamics in that way too.
Yeah, certainly an interesting prospect, like you mentioned, Liverpool dipping into that Brazilian wonder kid market. Do you think, given we were looking at Mateus Nunes, obviously he's ended up at Wolves, seems like sort of a similar profile of player. That's obviously a market where we're very familiar with the Portuguese league. But do you think that it brings risks with it, sort of dipping into Brazil? We're gonna come and move on to talking about another wonder kid, somewhat more proven in Bellingham. But do you think that it does bring risks with it dipping into that market when so many of those players are really unproven?
It definitely does, yeah. The whole Portuguese thing looks like it's gonna kind of continue with the midfield. Obviously, Nunez will have played in the Premier League by then, so it's almost ideal for Liverpool in that way to have it if they are still interested, and it looks like they are in Nunez. It's ideal to have him almost get a year under his belt at this level, and then you can almost test his worthiness, really. So that's kind of maybe the ideal circumstances, but he's also not kind of far removed from playing for Sporting. And then it looks like Enzo Fernandez from Benfica as well is a player who seems to be quite a few reports saying that he's on Klopp's list. So it looks like that's going to be a feature of the sort of Julian Ward regime, which isn't a surprise at all in light of the amount of contacts he has and the work he's done in Portugal and with the national team and things like that. So that certainly looks like it's going to be a trend. And then obviously now we've got this kind of Brazilian link popping up too. So it's one of them, isn't it? It's sort of, on the one hand, it is risky because they aren't playing maybe at the highest level. So can those traits carry over? We saw Liverpool take a chance with Nunez in that sense. But also, on the other hand, is it a way to almost get in early, really? And obviously Nunez was a lot of money, but other signings like Diaz, if he's playing in a different league, does he cost a lot more money? You could say the same for Gomes, very young player, only 21. Maybe pick him up now before he makes kind of an inevitable move to Europe and his price increases. So from a business standpoint, then yes, it might actually be smart as well as risky at the same time. So you just got to hope, really, and you got to place your faith in the level of sort of data really that goes into the recruitment that would show that the player can handle the step up. And I think we can have confidence based on Liverpool's kind of hit rate with recruitment that they will find out which players can succeed and which can't, because we see players, playing in Portugal who have brilliant records there and they just can't carry it over. But then you see others, just if you look at Manchester City, Ederson, Cancelo, Diaz, all these players have sort of come from that Portuguese league, and they're some of the best in the Premier League now. So it's just about finding which ones have what it takes to make that step up, like I say, and which ones don't.
Yeah, some commenters agree with me saying try and get them early. It will save us money. But we are going to move on now to another commenter has just brought up. He thinks it's too late now to get Jude Bellingham. Obviously, another great performance in the Champions League. Pep Guardiola was full of praise for him. Just how much do you think, not just Liverpool, the recruitment department themselves, but also, Liverpool fans, obviously, just how much do you think everyone around the club is sort of hanging their hat on us getting Bellingham next summer?
I think that's a huge amount. I think that's happening to a massive degree, to be honest. Like, I even felt it yesterday myself when I saw a clip. I don't know if it's a recent clip or not, but there's one of those England Q&A videos, and they ask Reece James to guess which former England player Bellingham would want like a signed shirt from or something like that. And it's like Lampard, Gerrard, and someone else is the option. And Reece James, obviously being a Chelsea player, would guess Lampard. And then Bellingham kind of like scoffs at that. And he's like, no, Stevie G. So his love for Gerrard is abundantly clear at this point. And it feels like, certainly from his side, that he would be fulfilling a dream if he played for Liverpool. And then that really puts the onus on the club to actually beat off the competition, get in there with the bid, agree to deal with Borussia Dortmund, and not fumble it really, because it will feel at this point, there's no bid that's gone in, anything like that, as far as we know. But it will still feel like Liverpool have sort of thrown it away if they don't sign him. And I think part of that is because they have been putting up the messages during the summer window saying, look, we're delaying our big midfield signing because we want to make sure we can get Bellingham next year. So they've pinned their hopes on it. they've made that clear through the media that they have, and they've taken a chance by doing that because the criticism that will come their way if he goes somewhere else is going to be pretty intense, and you'd probably have to say rightfully so.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the club will be getting pelters from all corners if we fail to get Bellingham next summer. But moving on from sort of, will we, won't we? Were the Reds to get hold of, such a young talent and obviously offers so much defensively, offensively, he's a real box-to-box talent. How well do you think he would fit in that Liverpool midfield?
Well, I think you've got to look at the performance he put in at the Etihad the other night in the Champions League. It was, for me, the variety of the performance that was really encouraging. So you've got, partly because he's playing Man City, he's going to be expected to do a lot of defensive work. So maybe not the best representative really of his qualities in that sense, because he was pinned back in his own box. But when he was in there, he was defending really well, making some important interventions. There was sort of some really nice passes from him as well in the midfield, sort of spraying them out to teammates. And also, the runs he was making runs into the area, runs down the wing. He looks like he can easily do the attacking elements of that role on kind of the right side of Liverpool's midfield three. He got a load of assists last season, and it's not really surprising. And certainly someone who could score a decent amount of goals too, if he's got the license to make those runs into the area. And, the runs down the wing too. We know how much the rotations are a part of Liverpool's attack and play on that side of the pitch. So that's an encouraging sign in terms of his willingness to kind of move around and maybe ask other questions of defenders. But then also the big question, obviously, is, people criticise Henderson and Elliott for not doing enough defensively, particularly Elliott in recent times. He looks like, based on that he'll be able to offer that side of the game too. And I think that was the big thing that struck from the performance, was it was an all-round display. And if he can sort of make that impact on both sides of the ball, and it looks like he should be able to, then he looks perfect for it, really, in answer to your question. So, people ask questions about the level of the Bundesliga, but to see him play to that level against probably the best team in Europe right now on form is huge encouragement for Liverpool, and just makes it even more clear, really, why they're so desperate to sign him.
Yeah, I think it's clear to see for anyone who's watched him for any decent length of time how well he would fit in, Jurgen Klopp's philosophy and fit in that Liverpool midfield. But that is all we've got time for here on the morning bulletin today. Dave, thanks for joining me. But from myself and from Dave, that's goodbye for now.